the celebration of Eve Kahn's book. I found out or learned about Zoe Anderson Norris about 2 years ago, I think it was. The book hadn't been published yet, but Eve had done an incredible amount of research. And there was a show at the Grolier Club, uptown, a literary club, about Zoe Anderson Norris that Eve had pulled together. And I think I read about it in the New Yorker magazine or somewhere. And it was amazing, but as I'm walking around the show, because I see little booklets by Emma Goldman, who happened to live or work in the saloon next door to where I live on First Street, and I realized there was this whole kind of matriarchy of small press publishers at the turn of the century that was very exciting to learn that Zoe was part of. But as I'm walking around, somehow I found out that she lived at 338, is it? East 15th Street, and like a memory bell went off in my head because it's the building I spent a lot of visiting hours during my childhood. My Aunt Bertha and Uncle Irving lived there.
Oh, wow.
And my cousins grew up there underneath the ghost of, and they were unionists, they were organizers underneath the ghost of Zoe Anderson Norris. So all of a sudden I felt a kinship that I hadn't had. It was like between Emma Goldman on my block and Dorothy Day, the Catholic worker, down my street, and now Zoe. I felt like, oh, this cloud of witnesses.
Yeah.
I got a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
And so again, I want to thank you for coming and just say that we're happy to do this with the village trip wherever Cliff is, even though he was here, I saw him. Which is a wonderful organization that Pepe and I have done shows with the village trip for the past couple of years. And even though that festival is over, I really wanted to invite all my book friends and also all my girlfriends, because I was telling somebody, I wake up every morning in a state of like joy and terror. And I count on all of you to like talk me off the ledge, you know? What you do, I wake, and then once I get out of bed and I start calling people or I go outside, I feel fine because I know that this particular neighborhood is special. You know, the history of activism, the history of sharing love and as Sandra said, kindness. It's like, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, even though I dream every day of how do I get out? So anyway, thank you, and I turn it over to you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to give you a sense of how Zoe Anderson Norris came from rural Kentucky to rural New York's Bohemia and to fight for the poor with her pen. She was born in 1860 in a little old dog kennel town called Harrodsburg, near Lexington. Little old dog kennel town is how she referred to it once she became a New Yorker in early middle age. She was the 13th of 15 children of a theologian named Henry Tompkins Anderson and a long-suffering wife named Henrietta Tucker Anderson, the 13th of 15 children. Her father basically reduced the family to the brink of poverty by spending much of his time translating the New Testament, again from ancient Greek, through the lens of his evangelical faith, the Disciples of Christ. He published a couple editions of it. He never made much money at it. Zoe, you can see her as a steely, determined little girl at lower left. That is, she grew up in what she would later describe as the ragged edge of poverty. Her parents were very well educated. Her father was fluent in multiple ancient languages. That level of erudition was only possible in the American South before the Civil War because enslaved black people had done much of the hard work around the homes of Zoe's relatives in Kentucky, Missouri, and Virginia. I have excavated as many names as I can find of the people enslaved by branches of her family. So it's because of their labors in captivity that her cultured milieu, her education, high level, her wit, her vocabulary. So in a sense, her career was made possible by them, and so my research, my writing, my talk here today, in a sense, were made possible by their labors in captivity. As many names as I can find have excavated. That's the farmhouse at the outskirts of Harrodsburg where she was born, and she never stopped writing about the beauties of velvety bluegrass country, even to the ends of her days. She hadn't visited Kentucky in about 20 years by the time she died, and she never stopped writing about how gorgeous it is. I've been there multiple times, and I'm going back in just a few weeks. These are a few of her 14 siblings and their spouses. I'm not going to go into any salient details about them because it would take up the rest of Lyn's allotted time here today. I just wanted to give you a sense of the crowding that she grew up around. Her family scattered widely. They ended up in, she had relatives who ended up in California, Kansas, Chicago, and a number of them became musicians, photographers, and portrait painters, creative, entrepreneurial group, but Zoe's the only person who decided that it was a good idea to try and eke out a living by writing. Her father died when she was 12 in 1872. She was sent to an elite girls' boarding school in her Kentucky hometown. It's a gorgeous neoclassical campus. It's a luxury hotel now where I stay when I go visit her homelands. The head of the school sternly told the girl students, do not marry until you have enough professional skill, perhaps as a stenographer or a teacher, that you can support your family if your male breadwinner fails you. And Zoe didn't listen to him. She married days after graduation, 1878, age 18, like an idiot. And I'm quoting a memoir essay she wrote just before her death in 1914. She married like an idiot Spencer Norris. He had grown up in Harrodsburg. They knew each other since they were kids. He was very handsome, he was vain, and he was dull. And she constantly wrote, once she launched her career as a writer, about dull men who'd married women more intellectual than them. She never stopped skewering people she knew in print, but I still love her. So Spencer Norris was a storekeeper. The family, let's see, so they had a son named Rob about a year after they married, and then a daughter named Clarence a year or two later. The family moved to Wichita, Kansas, where the economy was booming, and other branches of her family homesteaded in Kansas on land like you're seeing at top right here, besieged by cyclones, droughts, and locusts. She never stopped writing about the terrors of homesteading in Kansas. That's her son Rob on the left, and of the pair of girls on the right, that's her daughter Clarence. These were taken around 1898 when she got a divorce on the grounds of Spencer's admitted adultery. She and a friend from Harrodsburg had caught him with a blonde in flagrante. So before the divorce, she'd been a restless, ignored, unhappy housewife, and with the divorce, she'd been experimenting with fiction and journalism. And with the divorce, that becomes a fire hose of words that she uses to support herself. Her son stays behind with the divorce and ends up working for railroads, largely estranged from her. Her daughter flees with her. She hated Wichita, but she found it provincial, and she knew that she, as a Kentucky belle, she was superior to all these nouveau riche Wichitans that she was living among. These are illustrations from some of her first stories in national publications. On the left, that's from a short story about an impoverished Kansas cowgirl who was killed by a cyclone. The center image is from Zoe's travelogue about climbing Pikes Peak, wearing nothing but thin slippers that fell apart on her feet. And on the right is from a short story about a woman in Kansas writing to her mother-in-law in Kentucky, but it's trying to be friendly to her mother-in-law in Kentucky, but hates her. And this is apparently based on Zoe's real-life bad relationship with her first husband's mother. 1899, 1900, Zoe and her daughter Clarence travel widely in Europe, and she often writes home about American women traveling alone in Europe, and she especially documents the slums that she's seeing in Paris and London. She's seeing little kids holding hands in the Paris slums, and they look like dirty pearls on a string, she writes. And she writes about the artists starving to death, sleeping on the floors of museums and artists' garrets in Paris. She goes to the World's Fair in Paris, 1900. That's the image at top right. That's a photo she took. Her daughter meets a handsome Brit there named Harold Morris, who turns out to be a scoundrel. Her daughter has a son quickly named Robert Morris, and ends up stuck in London for years, trying to get out of Harold's clutches, get custody of the boy, and get back to the States. By 1901, she's based in New York, and she basically never leaves again. And these are illustrations from some of her many, many, many stories about women writers eking out a living in New York. Some of them are potboilers, they're love stories, they end happily, unlike her own experiences in love. In 1902, she reaches her first peak of literary fame. She publishes a novel, The Color of His Soul. It's about a charismatic socialist orator named Cecil Mallon, who comes to the Lower East Side from his home in Harlem and preaches sympathy for the wage slaves of the world. There are women in this novel based on Emma Goldman, for example. He gives all these firebrand speeches, and he is unmasked as a predator and a hypocrite by his neighbor in Harlem, whose name is Dolly, who's a freelance writer from the South, of course, living in Harlem, where Zoe was actually living at that time. This novel describes roaming these streets, seeing desperate poverty, seeing fire escapes full of rotten mattresses with little immigrant kids playing, having tea parties on these rotten mattresses. She vividly describes this neighborhood, and she also describes the settlement houses that are coming to try and improve these terrible conditions. There's only one problem with this novel. She actually knows a hypocrite predator socialist orator named Courtney Lennon, and the character she's calling Cecil Mallon, and he recognizes himself and he threatens lawsuits, and the publisher pulls the book. The one happy result of this is that she marries the illustrator of the book. His name was Jack Bryans. He was 12 years younger than she is, and I don't think she ever told him how old she actually was. He's a prolific artist of silhouettes for magazines, postcards, books. And the marriage sours quickly. She begins to write in her fiction and journalism about how boring it is to be married to someone who tries to be funny in their cartoons all day long, who tries to grind out fun all day long. I don't think they were formally divorced, but they separated after a couple of years. 1905, 1906, and 1907, Zoe supports her daughter, who's managed to get back to the States by then, and her grandson, with a fire hose particularly of newspaper journalism. She walks the perimeter of Manhattan for the New York Times, and she writes down hauntingly beautiful details like little kids alone at the waterfront with sacks of kindling on their backs. They're picking up bits of wood that they're going to need to burn in the winter in the unheated tenement apartments of this neighborhood. And she also maintains a sense of humor. She collects 12 stories that she's written that are basically tall tales told by a fictitious Kentucky colonel about feuds breaking out in and around her Kentucky hometown. And she maintains a sense of humor to the point that she interviews the most famous zoo animals in town. So the hippo complains, every time I open my mouth even, I make a sensation and I hate all the unwanted attention. And she tells him, just try being a woman journalist. Then when you open your mouth, you really land in hot water. 1907, 1908, she supports the family increasingly with documentation of the immigrant neighborhoods around here. Italian, Eastern European Jews, Irish. She is told these neighborhoods are dangerous, but she can't resist, and she goes deeper and deeper into them. Her heart breaks to see the little mothers, the little fathers of these neighborhoods. Those are the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who are assigned, expected to stay home and take care of their infant siblings. She sees little kids pushing baby carriages who can't see over the handlebars. But she comes to admire the resourcefulness of the poor, that they can take a doorway, a stairwell, and turn it into a thriving pickle stand. That's her daughter at lower left, and the boy at the far right is her grandson, Robert Morris. By 1908 or so, Clarence brings the boy back to Kentucky to raise him and marries a scene farmer, a very stable, sensible man to get away from the chaos of Zoe's Manhattan eking out a living life. Zoe's bereft without them. At one point, she ends up in a charity hospital. She's convinced the staff would kill her. She's delirious, except they realize she's a well-known writer. In 1909, she pulls herself together. She has some jewelry left. She pawns it. She decides to found her own magazine, The East Side. She is living where Lyn's relatives later moved, 338 East 15th Street, The East Side. It's a 7-story building. It's newish at that time. She has a south-facing apartment, so she overlooks a sea of desperate immigrant poverty that stretches basically all the way to City Hall. And she announces in her brochure, her press releases, I've got enough material just looking out my windows to last me the rest of my writing days. She sends out this brochure. She gets blurbs from famous people, including David Starr Jordan, the president of Stanford. She writes every word in her own magazine, and she announces she's not going to take any contributions from any freelancers unless they pay her. And she gives herself all the masthead titles, and she changes them with every issue. And they include, over the years, Bootblack, Circulation Liar, Printer's Devil, The Whole Cheese, and The Whole Shebang. She finds an illustrator named William Oberhart who's willing to work for her for free. She pays him by sharing with him the press passes she's getting to Broadway shows, and loves going to theater. She reviews it in her magazine, and that's how she recompenses him. And whatever she's writing about, he's following her around the slums and documenting. Gaunt, exhausted child laborers and traumatized, bewildered new arrivals at Ellis Island. She goes out to Ellis Island and she sees cages full of deportees. People who are being sent back, not to their homeland, but to wherever the steamship line would dump them. So they're going back, they're being deported back to greater poverty and risk of violence than they had even escaped from, begging for some last-ditch government effort to save them. All of this she writes about. She goes to synagogue services, she meets rabbis who are social justice activists. She writes about all of this, and he illustrates all of this. And nonetheless, she loves New York. She loves the Woolworth building, for example. She sees the skyscrapers rising, flashing back the fire of the sun. She still loves New York, in spite of all its inequities. She sees men, women, children tottering under enormous burdens. She sees peddlers getting in a spat to control a particularly well-trafficked corner on the curb. She writes about begging for basic government reforms. Can we get the trash cans emptied on the streets of the Lower East Side, the way we can in a richer neighborhood right nearby, so they don't spread deadly disease? Can we impose sensible alimony laws so that a man can't simply move to New Jersey and then not have to pay any child support or alimony to his family left starving and freezing in New York? She interviews the families of the victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. She is walking all around this neighborhood, and flukishly, magically, she writes down names and addresses. So I can go to all the tenements where I know that she interviewed. And then I realized, oh gosh, there were 2 families here that had lost a teenage breadwinner in that fire. She writes hauntingly beautifully about these immigrant families broken by grief. She writes about herself. She writes about her beauty treatments. She kind of admits that she's lying about her age most of her career, most of her life. She shaves eventually a full 10 years off of her age. She's vain. I still love her. She pretends to be poor. She tears her gloves, and so that she can go to a charity and say, I need help, I'm homeless. She wraps herself in shawls, and she plays the accordion on the streets here with a cup attached to it for coins. And rich philanthropists that she recognizes walk right past her, and other beggars give her money. And she becomes written about at lower left. That's an image of her that appeared with a nationally syndicated newspaper profile. And you could just make out the sign over her desk. It was, "This is my busy day." She's one of hundreds of dreamers in her time who found their own small, so about 4 by 6 inch, underfunded, understaffed, disorganized little magazine. There's hundreds of them. She has only one female counterpart that I can find, and that's Emma Goldman, which you're seeing at the top. But Emma Goldman took contributions from multiple authors, and so wrote virtually every word herself. So she doesn't want to be pigeonholed as a shrill reformer, even as she begs for reforms. And she wants to draw more people into her causes and attract more subscribers by occasionally having some fun, which is exactly why we're here today, to gird ourselves for the battle, to gird ourselves to cheer up Lyn tomorrow morning, and gird ourselves for the battles to come by having some fun. Every Wednesday or Thursday night at a different restaurant, mostly in this neighborhood. She has a blowout dinner party for her friends she calls them the Ragged Edge Club, with a K, dedicated to the killing of care, with comfortable, with a K, exclusiveness, with a K. No rules, no dues, no constitutions, just the killing of care. And they're fascinating. They're writers, reformers, performers, filmmakers, physicians, lawyers, businessmen, just curious about life on the Lower East Side. Many of them, I realized, they're using a fake name. They've changed their name. They've come to New York. They're trying to escape from a scandal in their conservative hometown. And they dance like dervishes. The music they dance to, some of it is provided by a black ragtime pianist and composer named Harry Hutz. And I found some of his gorgeously Art Nouveau illustrated sheet music in the Library of Congress copyright files. And this is a fraction of my collection of other sheet music composed, performed by Zoe's friends in the Ragged Edge Club. You see a recurring image of a woman with great hair, great hats. That's a vaudeville star named Libby Blondell, friend of Zoe's. That's not her real name. Bluestein is her real name. And these are souvenir postcards from some of the restaurants that the Ragged Edge Club frequented, mostly down here. In the summer, they went out to the coasts of Brooklyn and Staten Island to some of the big resort hotels. The center image is from a restaurant near Times Square called Joel's Bohemia, where they hung portraits of the regulars on the wall. And one of those regulars, if you blow it up, I mean, they're that big in person on the postcard. If you blow it up to the absolute maximum magnification, it says Zoe Norris on it with a big black feather on her hat. And this is a fraction of my collection of cutlery, glassware, and china from the Ragged Edge's favorite restaurants. Because there's nothing, I often say, that brings you closer to the feeling that you're in the presence of the spirit of somebody you've been researching, writing about, lecturing on for years, than to hold a talismanic pickle fork in your hand from a restaurant you know they dined at. In the 1910s, she becomes widely known as the Queen of Bohemia because for running the Ragged Edge Club. And she hates that name at first because Bohemia in her time suggested a place where people were willing to live in filth and indulge all their worst impulses. So a man in Bohemia in her time felt perfectly justified in running off with his latest affinity, as lovers were euphemistically called. But if she gets called it so often, she just decides to claim it. And she begins to give out aristocratic titles to her friends. She taps them lightly with a long-necked Hungarian wine bottle, and thus is anointed, for example, Lady Betty Rogers of the Bronx, Countess Ella Bosworth of Brooklyn, and Baron Bernhardt of Hoboken, the Queen of Bohemia. And also in the 1910s, she publishes one more book, The Way of the Wind. It's about her own family's disastrous experience descending into poverty and madness at the Kansas frontier while homesteading. It's very beautifully written, it's very sad, and very few, because she self-publishes it, and not many copies sell. In the last issue, Jan-Feb 1914, of The East Side, she writes about her recent vivid dream that her long-dead mother, Henrietta, had come to her bedside at 338 East 15th Street and warned, "You're the next of my many children to die." Zoe writes that she shrieked this morning. She publishes a long description of this dream in her own magazine. She shrieked this morning, and then she grew relieved. She writes, "I hope I've done some good for the world by fighting for the poor with my pen, and I want the Ragged Edgers to throng my funeral." And they do. And these are the calling cards and condolence cards that the Ragged Edgers left at her funeral. At the top with a black rectangle on it is a card that was sent out by a friend of hers, the Prince of McPike, he was known as, Jack McPike. He was trying to keep the Ragged Edge Club going after her death, and it lasted another year or so. The news that the Queen of Bohemia had accurately predicted her own death made headlines in hundreds of newspapers nationwide. She wanted to be buried in New York, but her family sent her body back to her little old dog kennel of a hometown, Harrodsburg, Kentucky. And you'll note that the gravestone has her exact death date on it, Feb 13, 1914, but it has no information about her birth year. I think her friends were trying to protect for her, even for the afterlife, the secret of how old she actually was. Really quickly, down towards the end, her legacy. On the left, that's her grandson, Robert Morris. He became an admiral. He was a hero during World War II. He helped lead the armada that landed American forces on the shores of the Mediterranean and freed Europe from Nazi control from the south. Her daughter Clarence married a seed company owner named Fletcher Chelf. They had a daughter named Mary, who became a singer, a globe-trotting soprano, who eventually founded, in memory of the grandmother she never knew, she was born years after Zoe's death, the Ragged Edge Theater, which survives to this day on the main drag in Harrodsburg. So 2 more slides really quick. I own more of her work in print, I suspect, than she did. She didn't even have a will. She had no possessions of value. But what she did bequeath us all, of course, is this great story. More magazines in which she published kept surfacing even as I was finishing my Fordham University Press magazine. One surfaced at the last minute on eBay from August 1907, and it changed an entire chapter. Her spirit is definitely pushing me to get her story right. And finally, on the left, that's a lithograph stone that was used by her illustrator, William Oberhart, and that's a portrait of Zoe at lower left. I tracked down his descendants in rural Maryland, and they were persuaded to donate his massive archive. He went on to illustrate the first covers of Time magazine in the 1920s. Fascinating character. They donated his archive to New York Historical, but New York Historical didn't want the lithograph stones. They're beastly heavy. I had to have that though. So I brought it back to New York, and it tore through 3 tote bags. I had to get it back here, where she felt most at home. And finally, that's me, in front of 338 East 15th Street. I'm holding up a cheap reprint of the East Side magazine, and that was taken early in my Zoe journey. And then maybe 6-8 months later, this is from 2019 or something, like my journey started 2018, I went back after the photo was taken and I realized, wait, the last time I was here, there was graffiti on the door that said lost. And then 6-8 months later, the graffiti was gone and I realized, oh, she's not lost anymore. She's found. Thank you for your attention. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
I need to get my tiara.
Yes.
Oh, we're sure not selling.
I need a chair.
Oh, I need a chair, here. I think I'd like you each to introduce yourself and tell people about the work you do.
Hi everybody, I'm Mariceli Malave. Thanks so much, Lyn, for the invitation. Thank you, Zoe, for the book, for the presentation. I feel I learned so much about New York City just now. So I'm Mariceli, I'm a Puerto Rican lawyer. I'm going to talk about my organization called Cultura Balance, a little bit of my history and how I met Lyn, and our overlaps in organizing for Latin America.
Hi, my name is Savitri D. I run a radical performance community called Reverend Billy and the Stop Shocking Choir.
Hi everyone, my name is Faye Ginsberg, and I think Lyn and I go back at least 40 years because I recognized her hat when she wore at my wedding 37 years ago. And I teach at NYU, I'm an anthropologist, I do a lot of activist work right now in the disability community, and really, really appreciated the chance, Eve, to read your fabulous book. Thank you so much for the gift of that and for inviting us.
Hi everybody, I'm Amanda. I am an organizer and mother of 4 here in the neighborhood. Lyn and I go way back from when I was volunteering at the Girls Club. She doesn't talk about herself a lot, but she's done some pretty cool things too. And I'm the Justice Minister at Middle Church.
Hello everybody, my name is Sandra Santana. I'm a member of Middle Church also, and a member of the choir. I lived in the Lower East Side all my life, actually in the same apartment. My grandparents raised me. I raised my 2 daughters, and I'm a poet.
I do. I have a couple of questions I sent you last night. I don't have a piece of paper in front of me, but I kind of, because I know the work you do, I am a great admirer, but also I think you should talk a little more about it and how it's really kind of like you've walked the path of Zoe and all the women before us, turn of the century, and even before that.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, well, I'll make mine fast.
No,
Okay.
don't.
So we don't run out of
She's
time.
got a whole choir waiting for her. I'm feeling very
it's
guilty.
fine.
Okay,
So
so my background and actually how I know Lyn is the points that I think are similar to the book, I think are because of the external sort of fight that we all have taken on against social wrongs and for social justice. And I think especially the use of socializing for social justice, I get a feeling that's why I got invited.
She has great parties.
I have some parties, and at those parties we at the moment do salsa parties in Queens. So I'm Puerto Rican, born in Puerto Rico, came to New York as a young baby, and from that, salsa, especially salsa outside of Puerto Rico, it's really about going back and claiming more of your identity as we're outside. Salsa also is a lot of the ways that people have expressed a collective identity in New York. Salsa and many of our other types of music in Puerto Rico really is just it's a vehicle to express what is happening in Puerto Rico. It's also, like all kinds of music and cultural movements, is a way to spread the news about what is happening in Puerto Rico and to the people either in Puerto Rico or in the diaspora. So at these parties that we have currently, I have the next one in October 31st, by the way. We have a huge party in Queens in a neighborhood called Sunnyside. I don't know if people are familiar. So in Sunnyside and in Queens in general, there currently are multiple fights against us right now. We have on the western side, we have an upzoning that we're fighting against called Buena Lycée. This is to extend the skyscrapers that currently only exist on the shore by the river into further Queens, and to upzone that area is clearly going to price out even more and gentrify even more. So we have that fight on one side. On the other side, actually there was a protest today against a casino, it's called the Mets Casino, that's also coming up in the other eastern side of Queens, which is, where the most vulnerable immigrant communities are, which they will be the most affected by this casino. So there's that fight, and also I think probably most importantly, if I can choose one, is the fight against ICE currently in central Queens, which is coming and kidnapping people every day on the middle corridor of Corona and Jackson Heights, like right in the center of Queens. So at the parties, it's connected, I promise. At the parties, we, in the first half of the gathering, we talk about these things. We talk about what's happening to us specifically. My husband is from Chile, so he talks about the dictatorship that made his family come to New York City in the '73. The Chileans that came to New York mostly went to the Bronx, but there they found Puerto Ricans and like the young lords, so they all sort of like came together in this beautiful thing that tends to happen in New York City when people have had to flee someplace, and then you reach the city and you find other people who have also been displaced and had to leave. So that really is a way to fertilize each other's movements, and that all gets realized in these social spaces. A lot easier than not easier, but like it's a different vehicle for reaching people. I'm a lawyer, so I do like a lot of panels and I see a lot of testimony and things like that. So reaching people that way and speaking people's truth through testimony is one thing, but I found that connecting with people through arts and music, and really the Lower East Side is the mothership for this, but reaching people in a way that can touch them very profoundly, maybe more profoundly than you could at like giving them dates and things on a presentation. Maybe in that music or in that poetry, they'll feel something more deeply that can get around whatever truth that they have already made or whatever they've been told about a country or people before. So that we found that culture and music is a very powerful tool for reaching people and to actually having them join and support your social fight for justice for your people. So that's how our parties go.
You do have poetry before.
We do use poetry too, which is really, when you think about it, poetry, this is my lawyer speaking though, poetry is another form of testimony because it's a person's truth. And in a way, when you hear someone and someone's poetry about their life and what they have had to live through, in a way their healing also heals you. And it's a very beautiful circular moment. And so we have started always having poetry at the beginning of the parties and people to speak about what their social justice movements are and their current fights and things to invite people.
Which is very
to
rare in
those.
salsa music that
Salsa
you go
poetry.
and they have poetry. I mean, you go, and then the people are like this, what's going on in here?
Yes, and we
And, you
snap
get it
them
a
that
little-
way. And I like to think that, so we invite Pepe as our guest as many times as I can get him to come to these parties, because salsa in a way has sometimes been separated from the social movement, and unfortunately some music has been separated in general from the foundation of many of those, that music is meant to express something that's happening to someone, like poetry. So we hope to keep that all together and to snag the ones that came just for the music and reach them and have them join the army. So that's my hope.
for that. I look forward to joining one of your parties. I guess I first just want to say how moving it is just to see a woman's life in such detail. I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. It makes me imagine the city and all the other women whose stories I don't know, and yeah, just really grateful for that. And to see the things that she held in her hands and pictures of her and pictures she made. So that's really moving. It's pretty hard to talk about what I do right now. I guess I just would rather reflect a little bit on Zoe and things it's bringing up for me, and just to put them in the room from my own perspective, of course. One of the things is about place and her searching for a place, and you mentioned this too, this sort of fugitivity that so many people have in the world and have always had from various things. And of course, on this continent, you know, we are, most of us, not indigenous to this place. And so we begin in a kind of alienation from the place, you know. So I love thinking of Zoe like finding her way to a place, like so many of us do, which is New York City, and then being surrounded by other people who are also finding a way to a place. I think that's what matters about New York City above all, really, is the way we're pushed together in our placelessness, and then we make a place out of that, and then what happens? So I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking how interesting it is to watch a person try and try again, not to cede their sovereignty to a man, to a husband, to an institution, to a boss, to an employer, to finally find this way to be a sovereign and creative human on earth. And then what does it engage in her, right? Is her care, right? Is her compassion, is her vocation is then telling the story of people who maybe don't have that ability at that time. That's very compelling to me in this moment when we're all of us looking authoritarianism in the face and questioning our own sovereignty, I think, every morning, right? So I'm thinking about that. I read this Nietzsche quote the other day where he says that autonomy is the ability to make promises. And I've been really thinking about what that means, like in a time like now, because that's a question about agency, right? That's a statement about agency. How do I have agency? What does it look like? What does it turn into? What do my actions yield? And thinking about Zoe and her amazing ability, it seems, to like make a promise, fulfill her promise, right? It's like, I'm impressed by her ability to do that. It seems harder and harder to do that in the world that we live in. I think about care itself, which we throw around, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Our friend David Graeber used to say the opposite of a king is care. And I always was like, what? He doesn't, he's an anthropologist, he's read a lot, and this is what he comes up with. The opposite of a king is care. And I guess the feminist in me is like, wait a second, looking at Zoe's life and thinking like, a lot of women, myself included, we roll through life sort of wanting what we have, having what we want. Like there's a relationship, you end up in the world where you make the best of what's happening to you. And I can definitely see that in her life, right? She's making the best of what's happening to her, and she turns to care. So I'd say the feminist in me is like, well, what would she have turned to if she was a man in that same situation? Would she have turned to care? Is that forced on her? Is that work she has to do because it's the work she's expected to do? Is it because the topic of care, the work of care, is carried by women. I mean, they're just questions, you know, that come up for me, especially in this time right now. Because I think we're all trying to figure out how to care, and I think we're failing at care a lot. I mean, certainly as individuals, I'm sure we all care. You know, I'm sure we're doing okay in our lives, but like as a collective, our care is kind of failing all around us. We're failing over and over again, and so, you know, I have questions about care. And I'm putting them in the room for you all to pick up too, and like whether that's still women's work, you know, and whether we really need to interrogate it a little bit more, just the whole idea of it. If the opposite of a king is care, then is the opposite of a king also a woman, you know? Or, I mean, there's just questions I have. I'm having these questions, okay? So, and then finally, I would just say that like I am so happy to be in New York City right now. I'm so in love with this city. I sit on the subway and I watch these moments of tenderness and intense intimacy between strangers. I walk these streets that I have bled all over. I've bled all over these streets. I've been brutalized by them. I've been, you know, I've fought for them, and I'm so grateful to be here, and amongst other people who I have fought for them with, and feeling Zoe as like a member of that tribe, and so just really grateful to you, and I apologize to all of you for the rambling nature of this, but I actually just want to share the questions I have about, you know, what I encountered in her work and your presentation of it, and then maybe we can talk about it.
Thank you. No apologies.
Thanks.
So I'd like to turn to ask Eve some questions about the writing. I'm a writer also, and I just appreciate the artistry and craft of the book in so many ways, and just the enormity of the archive you amassed from, you know, which was hidden. I know it was hidden in plain sight, but because you made it feel like it's hidden in plain sight. So I just want to call attention to some of your strategies as a writer, and to see if you'd like to respond, because I think they really spoke to me. When I read a book like this, I think about my own practice. So first of all, I really loved how you wove your own family story.
Thank you.
And braided it, and that wasn't as apparent in the slideshow, but I feel like it's your jumping off point. Your family were Ukrainian Jewish immigrants from, you know, a similar, you know, a period when many people were arriving here, my family as well. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your decision to braid those stories together so beautifully. And, you know, it goes deep into Zoe's life, but you come back to yourself throughout in very powerful ways and ask really wonderful speculative questions like, could that have been my family? You know, how did she, and especially things when people left Ukraine at that point, and Ukraine continues to have, I mean, it was bad. It was a miracle people got here and did not get massacred. So I wonder if you could just, I have a couple questions for you. So Andy, yeah.
So the reason I fell in love with Zoe Anderson Norris, a friend of mine showed me copies of The East Side. He's a magazine collector. He's a wonderful madman. And I leafed through and thought, who in heaven's name is this woman from the 1910s that's not a Jewish name? Why was she sympathetically illustrating and writing about my own mother's parents and aunts and uncles who came to the streets of the Lower East Side, and they escaped violence and trauma at home, and they struggled here. One was a cornet player, one was, I was told he was a hotel clerk, but he was actually the elevator operator when I dug more deeply into it. Incredibly humble origins, and they tried to stay married, and they tried to keep their kids safe, and they tried not to work in a terribly dangerous sweatshop. In the course of writing this book, I asked more questions about my own family, and I found family graves that I hadn't even paid attention to. I had relatives born in Ukraine who would not talk about it. When you asked them, they said, how's your daughter, basically. They did not want to talk about it. And then only recently, after I finished the book, one relative, we had a family brunch with a group of cousins I only recently got in touch with, and one of them had an album that I'd never seen, and he said, yes, my grandmother Evelyn explained, so this is my mother's first cousin, Evelyn, the ship we were supposed to leave Ukraine on, but somebody got sick, that ship sank on the way over. And the ship we did take sank on the voyage back. And so every day I wake up and I say, I'm just grateful to, apparently Evelyn woke up and said, every day I'm grateful to be here. But I tried not to write one of those books, which is, I'm standing at the grave of such and such, and I'm feeling such and such. I really tried to keep myself out as best as possible, but one reason I love Zoe is because my grandparents, great-uncles, great-aunts came here at a time of virulent anti-Semitism, and she wrote about them so with such care, such compassion.
If you don't mind, I have a few more questions.
Sure, Lyn, is that okay? Yes?
Or do you want to pass it along?
Okay, so I'm just gonna say one more thing. Thank you so much. Also, I mean, I don't know how many other people, I experienced that in my family. I did not know how many people were murdered until after my parents passed, and I went through records and things, and they worked so hard to raise children who were not traumatized by what they've been through. So I appreciate the
Faye, tell us about your work.
and my work, but I want to ask her one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just want to say how, as a writerly strategy, to acknowledge the enslaved people who made those life possible. That is just very moving, and I feel like, how come I never thought about that in my own work, and or other ways you can continue to peek back behind all those scary curtains. So I want to thank you so much. Yeah. So I'm going to pass it on. I'm happy to talk more about myself, but I feel like the occasion.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the way you've organized this, but I'm just going to break frame because I wanted to hear more of those things from you. And I don't know when I'll get to ask them of you again.
You want me to answer that really
I
quickly?
really do.
Okay, really
That's
quickly.
okay.
Really quickly.
We all want to hear.
So, well, first of all, I don't watch TV. So a quick secret. When the COVID lockdown came, New York Public opened up all its most elite scholarly databases to anyone at home with a library card. So I logged into Ancestry Library Edition, and I have never shut down my machine since March 15th of 2020.
Wow.
So I don't watch TV, my family watches TV, and I dig deeper into Ancestry.com.
Look, more dead relatives.
More dead relatives. Yeah. So the vividness with which you can now see the legacy of enslavement in the American South, it's vivid, it's in bright color, but it's in black and white. It haunted me. It would have haunted me if I hadn't published that list that I was able to excavate, because the way we know anything about Zoe's uncle, or one way we know anything about Zoe's uncle, actually had an uncle in Western Kentucky who helped people, whose congregations helped people get out of Tennessee through Kentucky onto Ohio, and then from there they helped foster the Underground Railroad. The reason we know about this is because there were notes taken, they also were part of the movement to educate black pastors and send them to Liberia or have them work as pastors in the States. Many branches of Zoe's family, even those who enslaved black people, believed passionately that the way of the Lord was to eliminate enslavement in the American South. There's so many paradoxes, and these wills and these legal proceedings that involve human beings, and that a human being was worth more than the land they were working. If I hadn't written that tribute page, illustrated in my book, which you can buy after on your way out, just saying, I illustrated with a lovingly taken photograph of a woman who'd been enslaved in Zoe's hometown and then stayed in her family's employ after the war. If I hadn't published that photo and hadn't written that tribute, it would have haunted me.
Wow. Thank you all. I'm also so grateful to be here and wanted to start with that tribute to enslaved siblings as well. I found it very, very powerful, and also like a collective call for all of us. Like, it doesn't matter what we're doing, but we can all do the history to see the individuals who helped us get to where we are today, and to share those stories, and to lift that up in all the ways that we can. So thank you for that. I don't know if there was a question, but I can kind of riff off what you all have done, sort of what you're sitting with from the book and from being here today. And I'm sitting with a lot. I have some friends in the room who were like, I just feel very overwhelmed with the world. That's why I wanted to come today as well. And I hear you, and I see you, and I feel very overwhelmed with the world as well. And one of the things that was comforting to me about being asked to be part of this conversation and to get to know this one individual's story is this idea of interconnectedness, and really how we are all connected in this common quest for collective liberation. And you find your people. Like, if you have that as your North Star, you are gonna find your people, and your people are gonna find you. If you are open to it, that's how the universe works. I really, really do believe that. Case in point, I was reading her biography, this beautiful book, and I'm from a small town in Kentucky as well. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, who is this person that I didn't even know? And I feel so connected to her as almost like another one of my spirit guides who grew up in rural Kentucky and then ended up in the Lower East Side, like figuring out life and organizing and having this like inner drive to eradicate poverty and to work alongside our newest New Yorkers, our immigrant siblings. And so I want to thank you both for that rejuvenating call and reminder of our interconnectedness for me in this particular moment. And I also had the honor of befriending the late Bell Hooks, who was a cultural critic who lived in and was raised in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And so that's also a very significant place in her story. And so I'm just sitting with all the synchronicity in the space right now, and using it as a reminder of how we are all, even if we feel very confused and overwhelmed at different points in our lives, we are actually in the right place at the right time. And so be open to looking for those reminders of the divine and of the goodness, because those reminders are what are going to keep us going. And it's what's going to keep us energized and able to just get up every day, Lyn. And I mean, I am also thinking about, like, I just get so mad at some people's inability to see also the interconnectedness of all the isms and all the crap that's happening in the world right now. And, for people not to see the interconnectedness of what's happening to our neighbors right here by ICE in Queens and in Federal Plaza, and here in the Lower East Side in Chicago. I mean, y'all know they handcuffed children like in Chicago this week. I mean, it's not okay. And then also, what's happening in Palestine and Gaza. We're on the 2 years of the genocide, and it all is very, very overwhelming. And so our ability to connect these dots to injustice, but then also to community, I think is really, really what's going to get us through. I'm thinking about this care thing as well, Savitri, and also connecting it to community. Because I think, which is what it seems like you do, like so beautifully. Because I think those two things can't be disconnected. So, when I'm thinking about this question of like whose role is care, and of course nurture and care is statistically and traditionally becomes a woman's work. I think women who do it know that it's work that has to be done because it's how the world keeps going. And I think that, if we can de-gender and if we can de-binary, I don't know if that's a word, the work of care, I think that's going to be really, really important in the days ahead.
So I found Zoe to be quite an amazing woman. How she took it upon herself to write these stories and put herself in the stories of these people that she didn't know and dared to publish them without anybody backing her up. She did this all by herself, but for other people, to tell stories that people didn't want to hear about or wanted to ignore. And it seems to me that, this is how it always happens after a new group of people come in and they experience the same thing, and another group of people come in and they experience the same harm. And people like you, people that are here in this room, are the people that have the courage to document it, you know, to talk about it, to expose it. And I mean, it's easy now, we have social media now, but for somebody like Zoe, she had a newspaper typing at her and remembering everything vividly, and she was a witness to these, you know, to humans that were living in like the worst conditions, and to put herself in that situation where she probably didn't have to, but she got called to do it. It's really amazing. Her life, I didn't know what to expect today. I didn't know what to expect about the book. I never heard of Zoe. But I kept thinking back how we have to be witnesses for each other, how we have to set aside our differences and look at each other's humanity. That's what she did. Even when she was making fun of people or, you know, taking stuff back, but she was looking at people's humanity. She talked about, you know, rape. She talked about young girls getting pregnant by, you know, rich older men, and then women being left alone, and then alimony. I mean, come on, we could be talking about yesterday, today, you know what I mean? Like it hasn't changed, which is very heartbreaking that it hasn't changed. That we cannot look at each other as a fellow human being. Forget about man, woman, black, white, Palestine, nothing, forget about that. Look, a human. You're a human being, I am a human being. We are on this earth together. The magnitude of goodness that we can provide on this earth if we just all came together is huge. I mean, it would be so wonderful. I'm looking forward if you like find any more information on Zoe and share with people, because she's really amazing, and I would really like to even more know the history of women like Zoe that paved ways for other immigrants, other people to come in and learn their stories, because their stories are my stories. And we keep each other's stories alive by you writing Zoe, by us telling stories, by your salsa, by organizing, by bringing our children to these things that maybe going to talk about those stories. And that's all I have. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm going to add a cheerful note, which is, so people ask me what about Zoe's stories give me hope? And one thing that gives me hope is all the stories, is being on this panel and having Lyn just send out a bunch of emails that like miracles when Pixie does. Also, I do get hope reading Zoe's descriptions of this neighborhood, because there's no climate control, for example. She described children sleeping on the roofs of these tenements just to get a breath of air in the summer. We have climate control, we have way less tuberculosis, we have, we don't have 8-year-old newsboys chain smoking on every corner, and hoping to reach the next level, the next rung up in the newspaper distribution world. She saw really dire things down here. We are better, it's hard to remember when you read through the headlines every day. We are better off down here. But what I love is realizing that this place has remained such a hotbed, right? That she was there when the settlement houses were just coming down here, and that the traditions, generations of people here have maintained that act. And I will say on behalf of men, Jacob Reese was doing something similar to what she was doing. He's best known, Lillian Wald. So rich women came to this neighborhood, as well as people like Zoe, who was going poor, documenting the poor. But Jacob Reese is, he was best known as a writer in his time. All of his photographs are the most remembered now, yes. question.
It's
in the
not
back,
a good
yes.
question, I just want to share that there's a gallery on, called Cakeabilia House on 2nd Street, and currently there's a show of Harlem Renaissance WPA artists, and one of the paintings on display is about the Underground Railroad. But anyway, I just wanted to share with you, everybody, that it's up, and it's just an outstanding work. It's just really worth checking out.
And there are other women of Zoe's time. She inspired a woman named Sophie Irene Lowe, who ended up being head of the Children's Welfare Board, I believe it was called. And she fought to keep families together when they were being evicted. Because housing court, it's another thing to be cheerful about. Housing court now is extremely tenant friendly, In Zoe's time, basically a landlord could file papers against you and you'd be tossed out days after you couldn't pay your first rent. So Sophie Irene Lowe, I know, was inspired by Zoe. She regarded her as an inspiration dispenser. Also, there are way fewer charity hospitals where unwed mothers give up babies that are days old, right? Zoe's daughter gave birth at one of those hospitals in the East 80s in 1901, 1902.
About the Triangle Fire.
Yes.
I don't know if he or she does it, but every year on the anniversary, there was a person going around.
Oh yeah, join them.
And inviting.
Yeah.
But in this building lives
Yes.
such and such,
beautiful.
and she died in the fire. But
Yeah.
I haven't looked for it. But I know it was a tradition for many years,
Yeah.
and it was a way for people
So good.
that didn't know.
Right.
Maybe out of 10 people, at least 5 people would be interested. Why is they writing that name in there?
Yeah.
But it
So
was-
I take the names of the girls whose families Zoe interviewed and I go out and talk with that group. It's run by the Tenement Museum now, but it was long run by a woman, I forget her name, who lives in Ruth something. She lives in Ruth? Yes, right. So she organized. Yes, it was in Berlin. She organized it for years and years and years, and now the Tenement Museum has taken it over. And I go from tenement to tenement writing and there's something really powerful about knowing that, Becky Rosenfeld was here and Anna
Yes.
Alden was here. This
I
kind of
agree.
thing.
The
Yes.
other thing I wanted to mention is that I met Lyn at the Children's Liberation Daycare Center. I mean, with that name, you can imagine what was happening there in terms of people, especially women. But these daycares that started over here came out women that met in the playgrounds. And this is around Vietnam era war, that there was a lot of money coming to open daycares for the reason that women, because their men were at war, women needed to work. So there was this daycare movement started over here. Some of them were like the one that I worked, that it was one was liberation and the other one was a children's meeting that we merged. But it shows you that there's always women had a presence in this neighborhood for many years in many fronts. The housing front, the daycare front,
Houses, right,
and having
right now.
quality daycares. And Lyn, she was, it was an incredible years when she was there that I really love it. And I remember she telling me once, we were doing a bake sale, and she said, Jose, we gotta find another way to make money. I mean, we were there in the corner on a Friday, getting cake. And she asked me, do you have an idea? I said, okay, let's have a salsa dance. And then one night we raised about $4,000 or $5,000. She said, okay, this is it. And it was used for those children to have a quality of life. You know what I mean? Going to the Nutcracker, okay, over there, at Lincoln Center, and trips in the summer. So women always been, and those are my mentors. That's what I am what I am because of them. And it was a great experience for me to work in that daycare for many years.
That's beautiful.
So now you know who raised my kids. They do some work.
Is that a question?
There's a question.
There's a
There's a
question.
Yeah.
There's a question.
So this might not be possible, but because you might not have prepared this, but is it possible to just read like a very short paragraph from her, or, just a taste of her writing?
Oh, a taste of her writing,
Yeah,
okay.
The book,
I don't know if
Thank you.
you are able to,
But buy the book.
Oh, what's a passage? Let me think. Talk amongst yourselves. Talk about something hopeful that happened today.
Oh, man.
We came here. From mic to
We're
mic.
here, yeah.
Yes, we came here, right, yes. Oh, just really quickly, I'll just read a really quick paragraph. Sure. So she had very amusing opinions about, or very contradictory and ever-changing views about politics. She lived through multiple assassinations, right? These are terrible times, but she lived through the assassinations of Lincoln. Garfield had been a friend of her father's, or Garfield had gone to her father's evangelical congregation at one point, and then the assassination of McKinley happened soon after she got back from Europe to New York. And then she decided Woodrow Wilson was boring, and there were various politicians that she disliked. She hated Teddy Roosevelt. She hated his teeth, among other things. He was a Slav. She developed an intense hatred of President Roosevelt, blaming him for the sufferings of my beloved poor, including her writer friends. I know a woman of brains who spent the year of the panic. There was a bank panic in 1907. Literally, multiple businessmen, and she describes this also, throwing themselves in front of subway trains. Like, so every station, there was a risk that it would be before your eyes a morgue because of a man convinced somehow that his death would solve his financial problems for his family. I know a woman of brains who spent the year of the panic in a sweatshop, whose brains are now defective in consequence. The panic reduced the worth of all brains. She was very fond of her brain. She got hit by a car down here, and she got a cut on her forehead. And she went to one of the charity hospitals down here, and she said, "You don't understand, I need my brain. My brain is all I have to keep me from getting evicted." Whose brains are now defective in consequence. The panic reduced the worth of all brains. Mine were hardly bought at all. Maybe she had trouble selling her freelance work. I was hysterical over my lack of work. How volatile, unstable, intangible, and evanescent a thing it is to have to live by this brain. Thanks for asking.